Yeah. So are you okay with me just kind of kicking off? So,
yeah.
Right, great. So, thank you very much for your time for doing this, because I know that you've got a few Nat Geo deadlines that you're working with on some of your current projects. So I really appreciate your time. And I think I want to kind of say to you that you are two of truly my wildlife heroes. It's been amazing to get to know you a little better over the last few years, but I think I greatly admire your kind of commitment in terms of everything that you do to sort of protect, not only to protect kind of wild spaces in Africa, but kind of more importantly, I think not only the animals, but also the communities that are part of those spaces as well. And I think if I was to kind of look at your kind of work, it really sort of falls into three areas that we'll talk a little bit about today. It's the visual space, I think the science, and then the conservation. So on the visual side, you've been working in the field for over 30 years. You've made over 35 films for Nat Geo and 12 books. And in fact, I have one of these here that is a prized possession. And this book, I think was where I first kind of got to know you and your work with, this is documenting Lacadema and the beautiful documentary that you also made that kind of told that story. And I've been very privileged to kind of work with you on some of your more recent projects. One of those being Jade, the blue-eyed leopard.
Yeah, blue-eyed leopard, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about your visual work in a moment. And then, on the science side, in 2009, you established the Big Cats Initiative with National Geographic. And I mean, how many grants? Is it around about 150 that you've got?
Yeah, it's over 150 now in 28 countries. And most of those countries are African. I think there's only 2 that aren't.
Yeah. And then most recently, you established the Great Plains Foundation, which really has a mission to sort of protect, again, those wild spaces in Africa, but also a kind of commitment to kind of the environment, to the animals and the communities. And I think, I know the communities in particular are very, very important to you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So a tremendous breadth of work, but I just want to sort of start at the very beginning. And you've been described as true children of Africa. And I kind of want to ask you what does Africa mean to you both?
Yeah.
Well, Africa was the place that we were born, and so we are children of Africa, but it's got many nuances and faces. Yeah. You can end up in Cape Town in the French Riviera of Africa and never really know Africa. And so for us, Africa is that place where man was born, where we were born, where many animals were born. But it's that edgy harshness where you look into the mirror of your soul. Africa is that place, that thing. And there are not many other continents that are like that.
Yeah. I mean, ditto to all of that, and just to add to... It's very good. Very important through the pandemic to complement each other, as you can see.
Especially when Beverly goes, yeah, and all of that.
But to add to that, once you do a deep dive into what we've been doing into Africa, one of the writings of Carl Jung comes to mind, and that is, he wrote that Africa was one of the continents that still had a soul. And for looking at why did he feel that, and for us going in to discover the wild places of Africa, we felt that keeping the wildlife areas alive, vital. having migrations happening, having the predators out there was one of the key reasons. And I would say the other key reason is that the cultural differences right through Africa are so vast and are celebrated by each other instead of this constant battle, to have everybody the same. And so those are the two added aspects that I can give on Africa.
I think that it's an absolute miracle that there are wild animals like the lions behind you still left in Africa. It's an impossibility, actually. These are big, robust killing machines that wander in and out of human communities. And it's not the resilience of these animals, it's the tolerance of the people that reside near them that constantly astounds me. If we were doing this systematically, we would have wiped out anything like that, including elephants that raid our crops. But for some reason, we found it sometimes uneasy, but to a large degree, working level of coexistence in Africa, which is not existing in many other continents.
No, that's incredibly true. It's one of those places that I think it really does touch the soul. Every time I come back, it's oh my goodness, it's amazing what it gives back to you. It's a truly special place.
Yeah, truly. And in fact, if we go back to Carl Jung, he said the only way for anybody to be whole was to be nurtured in a wild place, in a true wilderness.
And I don't think, sorry.
No, keep going.
No, you can go.
Add on to you.
All that, but also, I don't think there's been a single day in wild Africa that it hasn't taught me something.
Yeah, and so it's always been soul food. And in fact, if anybody, truly wants us to feel the true aspect of what our time in the bush has meant to us, we've been challenged twice. Once with the buffalo incident, where that put me into ICU, and I couldn't be, just that, yeah. Okay. And I couldn't be in the field for 8 to 9 months. And then, of course, the pandemic, not being in the field for all that time. It makes you truly understand that it's a necessity for all of us. Too many people are divorced from true wilderness and from nature. And it definitely is a place where I am centered, I feel whole, and it's soul food in every single way. But that doesn't mean that whilst we've been in captivity, we haven't found a place. Now, for Dereck and I, it's different to those that aren't working in film and working. We can dive, what would you say? This is not vertical, but we can dive deep into making the films. And so I think that's what's kept us whole through this time. We made a point, seeing that we were going to be in what we call mission control, is to take on a few films. And so last year in the pandemic, we took on 4. Pumas sort of adding on to it because of the 2 hours and then 1 hour and then Jade-eyed leopard. But this year we've taken on 7.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I guess it's if you can't be there, having something that's it's I guess the closest thing to it is hopefully being kind of restorative for you. So talking about your visual work, I mean, you've talked about some of the films that you're involved in more recently. But can I ask you, I guess of all the films that you've made, could you, each of you, pick out a film that you're most proud of and also a film that you believe has had the most impact? Because they're perhaps not necessarily always the same thing.
Yeah, gosh, that is a hard one because there's some films that resonate very strongly because of a situation like Eye of the Leopard with lymphedema, and that truly, I suppose, changed our outlook in how to protect the big cats, and that's where we started the Big Cat Initiative. So that, but that one was a long time ago.
That was your shot. You got one shot.
No, there were two, and then one that had the most impact, which is quite a challenge. Wow, that is a challenge. I might say, even though I love the Okavango series and all that, I would possibly say The Last Lions, because just in a 6-month period, we reached such a huge audience, even if it was just on social media. We reached 94 million people just in 6 months in the States. So, of course, it then was going to grow after that. But it did open up the eyes of a global audience that we have a major issue and we can't live without predators. And already we only have, less than 20,000 left.
Yeah.
That, and from my side, there's no doubt at all that we would have to mention Eternal Enemies. It was not our first film, but it was a film that kind of put us on the map, put Botswana on the map in a way, but revealed something about science that nobody else had heard of before. And we've just recently had the opportunity to go into it again. And it's a good film, and it stood the test of time.
Over 40 years.
To a degree where somebody did a study in around 2001, a master's degree on, I think, our work, but primarily Eternal Enemies. And by then it had been seen by 1 billion people. And so the impact of a film like that is huge. And I think at the time, for us, and certainly what this author was saying, it was a pivotal film. Before then, people had done films on animals and not named them and not delved into the behavior. They were like snapshots of animal behavior. This was a far more intimate look at what was going on, and we named the animals and developed characteristics or reached in and found their personalities and drew them out. And some have said that from that moment on, natural history storytelling changed. Yeah. It also changed in the way that we showed it a rough cut form to somebody at National Geographic, and they passed it on to their friend, a guy called Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney. And he watched it, and he went in over a weekend. He went in to Disney on the Monday and said to his animators, "Give me a film like this. The storytelling arcs, everything about it. You do that in animation, and we've got a hit." And it became Lion King. And then they reached out to us, and they lifted some of Beverly's sound, and they flew us across there and gave us 2 sweatshirts, and we were adequately compensated as a result. But you can see the trends within, or the tone, I think it is, in Lion King developed out of Eternal Enemies. So sometimes the impact is not in how many people signed a petition to save the Arctic, but in how many people have subsequently watched The Lion King, generation after generation, and the genesis of that was in Eternal Enemies.
Yeah.
Gosh, I did not know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then I do think to add on to that, because you did get your double
sweatshirt.
No, you only gave one film. You've still got to give another film.
I used one as a favorite or an important one.
Okay, so then
that story, though. No, you don't get it.
I'm going to give you a second.
But the interesting thing about that story is that we were later at one of those, in my role in Disney. I'll help you with that.
Yeah. And there's another story to that. We were up in the mountains with our agents at some Hollywood event. And a man behind us was saying, "My gosh, you should have seen this film that I've just watched. And it's all about a male lion. They called him He Who Comes with Thunder." And of course, that's in Twanamela, but But the true meaning of in Twaidamela is he who comes with fire.
He agrees with fire.
Oh, that's right, he agrees with fire. Yeah. So and we turned around and it was Kevin Costner. So Kevin Costner was so taken by the film. It was a film that actually was a little bit of a cult film when it came out. I think it was so different and so interesting that we even had a New York band, the guy in charge of the band showed us in his little book that he had in Twaidamela written there. And he said it's a cult film. He said it reminds us of gangs in New York, and it just reminds us of life.
He had named his son in Twaidamela.
Yeah.
And in fact, not only did we influence young people via Lion King, to is a separation. But we were at some other event, which is now going to make us sound like we're always at events. But and this guy it was in a private home, but there was a bar, and there was this guy some distance away, and he kept looking at me, and I sort of looked down at my flies and said, it seemed to be in good order. And he then came over, an Indian guy from Mumbai. And he introduced himself and then said, I'm a big fan of yours and your film, Eternal Enemies. And I went, well, thank you very much. That's very, very kind of you. And he said, no, I've watched it 117 times. And I went, holy shit, why would you do that? I haven't even watched it 117 times.
Believe me, you have through the making.
And he said, no, well, it was, they allowed me only one film when I was in jail. And I chose Eternal Enemies. So I said, okay, well, I'm glad for you. I took off my watch, and then I said, why were you in jail? And he admitted that he had had a small run-in with the Indian government. He was a gun collector, and in actual fact, they thought that he was running an army. And I said, so how many guns you got? He said, I've got 1,460 guns. So I said, oh, and what sort of variety? He said, no, all AK-47s. So I thought, well, maybe the Indian government had it. But what he finally did was he took off his shirt and he had tattooed across here and all the way down here into a very famous Indian actor, like the Tom Cruise of India.
Yeah, and funny enough, even with the last lines, we had people sending us tattoos on their body.
Some you don't want to see.
Yeah, some you definitely don't want to see. But of the main character. But I just felt that because you stayed on one film, that elephants do need to have some form of recognition. And Soul of the Elephant. So if I may just add on to the Soul of the Elephant. Was our intention to speak out for elephants, but in a compassionate way, not the hard-hitting way of, look at the ivory trade and etc., but look at the elephants, celebrate who they are, and let the elephants tell us about the ivory through them investigating, the dead. That film became incredibly well known without us doing a PR situation on it. What's your famous lady? Oprah Winfrey saw it and then asked Ellen, did she see it on her show? And then Ellen's producer got hold of us. And so there was this wonderful natural flow, almost the way elephants are, let's reflect on this situation. So I felt that film was recognized in a way that elephants deserve to be recognized. And so I didn't want to exclude the sort of elephant.
So can I then, just to kind of, as you were talking, and I know that one of the things that you mentioned, that you have been re-looking at some of your archive and you've been updating. And I guess, what are the most surprising things that have struck you that has come out of that process?
I think for me, one of the most surprising things is how some of the older films have really held up. generally I don't watch our films. So we watch them, make them, narrate them, and then get them out, and then I don't watch them again. If we are dragged reluctantly to some sort of screening, we might step out and not watch it. But 35, 40 years later, watching Eternal Enemies, I kind of watched it with long teeth. I was going, this is going to be bad. But I was really into it, like I was watching it for the first time. So the storytelling was sharp, and it was, I really liked it. So yeah. I didn't expect to.
So what I found out of the 6 films, because we took on 6 films and we picked them for, obviously, to assist us as well with the Big Cat Initiative, and to talk about, what we discovered then. And we truly did discover remarkable science that had never been written up before. We were the first ones to capture it on film, but the first ones, intentionally to write it up as well. And so Eternal Enemies, as Dereck said, ultimate enemies. Nobody had ever filmed lions attacking elephants before. Even though BBC said they did when they eventually did capture it about 6 years later or 8 years later, we were the first to go out there. And then 60 Minutes did a piece on us discovering that as well.
And also Ultimate Enemies was kind of dumped by Geographic. They ran it a couple of times, and they ran it in the wrong aspect ratio. So it was a little bit of a thing for us, but watching it again, pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and then we managed to, I'll get back to the other films, but we also managed to get Jeremy Irons to re-narrate them all. He didn't do them all, but we now have created almost a package. But then, of course, Eye of the Leopard, well, this little leopard behind us, truly did change our lives. We felt that we were living in a magical time where we were, not only was she and her mother engulfed in this incredible love relationship, because at that early age, the mother is so attentive and it's all about nurturing. And of course, the young one is all about receiving everything. And so it does feel that way. But we were engulfed in it as well. And that was magical because of their acceptance to us. And then, of course, when the mother was out, we were always with her. The mother would be gone for 2 days. We were always with her. And so we had that magical experience. So Eye of the Leopard was wonderful to revisit. But we had to revisit it in a way where we had to cut it down to 44 minutes, and it was 86 minutes. And that was kind of painful because, that journey with her, we felt then that every aspect was so important. So cutting it down was tough.
I think, though, that the takeaway for me of this series is that it sort of tracks the journey that we've had with big cats. And so the earliest films are saying, wow, look at this stuff. The later films are, there's some really important things going on here. Yeah. And then the later ones are saying, behavior aside, we've got to pay attention, we've got to do something. So to track that evolution from being absolutely amazed by it to being angry and turning us into advocates for cats.
Yeah, so definitely the 6th part is the journey getting us to be advocates, without a doubt.
That's what I said.
Yeah, and I think the really exciting thing is, hopefully that's a whole other new audience. You've got the fans, that kind of know about these films, but ultimately trying to get a new audience to these films is going to be really, hopefully, very impactful. But I also, one of the things, Beverly, you mentioned just was about social media. And again, how have you used or adapted social media, which again is another kind of useful tool in the armory to kind of, push the message out? And I guess, how are you using that?
So if I can start that, just because I brought up the social media with the last lines. The last lines was really us dipping our toe in the water of social media. I mean, it truly was. So we had a lot to learn then. but it was amazing to see how effective you could be if it was authentic, and if the right intentions were there. From that experience in discovering the success of social media, not necessarily for the film, but for the aspect of conservation and what can we do, how can we all rally together to be effective. The pandemic has pushed us into a form of social media that's probably at the height of us in social media, because we've all been communicating, through Zoom calls, webinars, and social media. So right now we use social media. We have many different platforms, but all our social media is like our intention when we started, that the core of everything we do is conservation. And then, of course, we use the medium and the media, to broaden that. And all our social media is in that aspect of how can we share the knowledge, the atrocities, the hope, because the hope is important, otherwise we're all going to shut down. And that's what we're doing. And we're doing it through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, and all the different other social medias.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. And then if I just want to sort of talk about the science aspect, and I thought it was interesting that you were kind of saying how the 6 films helping support the Big Cats initiative, that's been going for over a decade now. And I guess, how has the science sometimes helped your films? I mean, are you trying to aim for this almost like virtuous circle where hopefully the two can kind of feed one another in terms of what, the work you're doing?
Very definitely. From the earliest days, Julie, we always viewed science as something that could serve us, not the other way around. And I don't expect people who are really interested in understanding the details of a scientific paper I might write about lions and elephants to find it, to go and watch National Geographic. Although, ironically, that's happened more often than I can tell you, where scientists have got hold of us and said, wow, have you got logs of all these elephant kills, for example? So the way that it works for us, because we come from a science background, we gather the science, we pore over it, and then before we even start a production, and it'll be our gathered research ourselves or from published papers. And then we take that whole bundle and then we throw it away. And then we go off into the field, knowing with a checklist of the things that we really want to cover, that we find interesting. And then we throw ourselves to the wind as well. And we let a leopard like this take us on her journey. But as she's taking us on that journey, it's like a board game, isn't it? So she's taking us from one scientific fact to the next one, to the next, to the next, to the next. So we never stray into anthropomorphisms or too far off the board. And so for that reason, we do have this very interesting relationship with science where it feeds our art, and our creative art becomes something else that science itself feeds on. And the extrapolation of that is into the Big Cats initiative, where because of our work with big cats, and particularly this leopard, as Beverly said, that started us thinking, because primarily during the period of time that we were with this leopard, 10,000 leopards were killed. Yeah. So we realized that she and others like her needed a voice. So we started the National Geographic Big Cats initiative to be that voice for her out of our art.
Yeah. And
then attracted a whole lot of scientists to it. So it is that sort of journey in this forest of art and left and right brain in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and then following that, you established the Great Plains Foundation. And I guess what I would, ask is with Big Cats and with the Great Plains Foundation, what does successful conservation, I think, mean to you both, you know, in terms of its impact?
It, in essence, in conservation, it extends the timeline between now and extinction.
Yeah. And
that's it. Everything we do every single day is working towards fending off that date of extinction, species by species, landscape by landscape. And so when we started Great Plains, the tourism side of what we were doing, we actually built it on the fundamentals of conservation. And because of our work within the Big Cats Initiative, we were able to get out of Duke University a timeline of where lions were, or where the big cats were, 15 years prior to that moment, 10 years, 5 years then, and where the projections were 5, 10, 15 years from there. And then we overlaid a human growth and distribution map on top of that, and very quickly found the pinch points where if we didn't do anything, we would see isolation, closing down of corridors, smaller and smaller islands. And according to Darwin's theory of island biogeography, the smaller the island, the more rapid the rate of extinction. And so what we tried to do was delay that timeline. So we were buying up blocks of land and leases in those corridors to make sure that we could keep 2 islands alive and delay that rate. So that's what it looks like to us, and that's at its core, even though there's now tourism involved, why we started Great Plains.
Yeah. So we thought, you know, in our early days, and in fact, if we want to go back to this 6-part series that we are revisiting, Dereck and I would often feel like we were 2 lone warriors. We were out there, we were discovering sort of an unveiling unique behavior, but we always had this very heaviness, realizing that how is this going to last? Because we could see the situations coming, you know, various different atrocities. And so we went out there charging forward to sort of illuminate the situations. And really, we had a period of thinking, well, okay, so now we've got it to the global audience and we're getting it to the individual countries, because we'd have premiere screenings and we would allow them to, you know, take it and create new policies, which often the right policies were being made. But then as time moved on, and possibly the last 2 decades, we've been out there, by the way, for about 4 decades. I know we often don't talk about it because it makes us sound incredibly old, but really, you know, doing the conservation work.
We should talk about while we can still remember.
Yes, as we can. And over the last 2 decades, it's become more and more evident that no matter what we're all showing on television, we're only reaching the audience that is already aligned with wanting to protect the planet. But the audience that isn't, we're not reaching. And so the Great Plains Foundation, other than creating what Dereck was talking about, is protecting those blocks of land and creating corridors. It also allowed us to start collaborating with a global audience, but also collaborating with communities on the ground and with individual governments. So Great Plains Foundation has been very effective in working with communities that don't have great education. Some of them do, some of them don't, but helping them understand that this is their future. Yeah. This is their future bank. And if they are the right ambassadors, they can protect it for their children, and on it goes, and they'll have a healthy planet, a healthy environment, you know, and a healthy bank balance at the end of the day. And so without a doubt, Great Plains Foundation has helped us be a lot more effective and utilize a new audience, both you know, as I said, the communities, but it's also made us go further into education. So we're doing a lot of education through the foundation, but we've also now moved that education into the Big Cat Initiative. So those are the two things that we feel we've got to collaborate with whoever wants to join us in getting better education out there so that all our future conservationists and ambassadors and policymakers are better educated on the environment.
And presumably, as the work, I would imagine the pressure during the pandemic in terms of your work, I mean, you always want to be hopeful, but has there been any surprising kind of outcomes, both from a negative and I guess and a positive light through the pandemic with what's been happening?
Yeah. So you want to go?
Okay.
I think in the film and visual space and in the conservation space and in the community space, overlaying all of those, very early on, March last year, actually, we realized that obviously we'd have to curtail some of the filming. Yeah. And then we went into the post-production on these, which was great. But we also realized that in the conservation areas that we control via the Great Plains conglomerate and more, we were going to potentially see a massive increase in poaching. Yeah. And so what we did in Great Plains is we shifted as many bodies as we could across into anti-poaching. So we were taken care of, because in tourism there was obviously nothing going on. It came to a dead stop. But we were able to manage our financial resources to a degree where we didn't mind too much about that. We hated it, but we could handle it. But we were taking care of the land. Then we looked across left and right and realized that most other tourism companies didn't have the same capacity as we did passively, or even the same will. So we started a project via the Great Plains Foundation called Project Ranger, where we went out and we raised as much money as possible, and it's an ongoing thing, to support these rangers that have been laid off, furloughed, cut back in salaries, keep them and get them back to their posts, get them back out into the field, get them patrolling and doing whatever they needed to do. And so in the last year, we've raised just over $1 million. Wow. And we've distributed that to,
oh gosh, I think 9 different countries. So, and of course, it's all about keeping individual rangers in the front line. So those rangers now will have a salary for a year. We will continue this because poaching is not going to go away. But for us, I mean, the quick feeling on what the pandemic did is we were worried that we were seeing a future pandemic, and that was an escalation on the poaching. And of course, the problem with this pandemic that has hit through the poaching is has escalated because no frontline workers, but it's escalated in the point of the individual wire snares, gin traps, those round traps, and it just wipes out everything. So it pretty much denudes or sterilizes vast tracts of land. And once that happens, agriculture moves in, ranching, whatever it is. And it's very hard, in fact, almost impossible to ever get that back. It happened at the Virunga National Park. Once the people moved the forest further and further, government's never been able to now displace all those people and give the forest back to the guerrillas. So that's something that we feared would happen, and it did start to happen. We would take regular calls once a week with an investigative group. We'd speak to people on the ground in all these different countries, in all the hot spots. And I must say, it was a somber meeting every time, because what we were hearing was devastating. And so that's why we've pushed Project Ranger to the point we have. We just spoke out at a presentation for Ranger Day, which is the 31st, a National Ranger Day, 31st of July. And the reason to do it was also to bring in these individual rangers right through Africa and let them speak as well. And it's heartbreaking, but just, so rewarding to see that we're not all bad. There are people around Africa that are compassionate about protecting the wilderness. And so we've always got to have hope, but we've got to give that injection of hope to them that the global audience will support them.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic initiative. And I think, was it also Prince for Wildlife were also helping to support Project Ranger as
yes.
well, which again, I know has raised over $1 million, which is, I think it's incredibly important. So
actually, we took on quite a few, funny enough, and this is talking about collaboration, which is key. So we did Art for Rangers, which was through Project Ranger, and then we had Ranger Challenge. See that was a great way, to bring awareness. And so I gave Prince to Ranger Challenge, which was Tusk and Ranger Challenge. Then CI, Conservation International, said they want to support Rangers, so I gave Prince to them. And recently, the one that you're talking about, Prince for Wildlife, which is Africa Parks. And each and every one has raised an immense amount, and you've got to compliment the photographers for giving their art. But by giving their art, many people probably gave that wouldn't normally give because they were also going to get something for what they gave. And so it really did help conservation.
Yeah. So as you said, Beverly, like four decades you've been kind of doing this. And I guess, you're two people with immense drive. What keeps you going? I mean, how do you continue to sort of keep pushing yourselves? Because you seem to have phenomenal energy. So it would be good to kind of hear a little bit more about that.
I think our drive is aligned, but if there are differences, for me, the reason I get up every morning, hopefully before the sunrise, is to save the planet. Not a small ambition, but it's not because I think nobody else is doing it, but it is my drive. I wake up every day, and the first thing I think about is, what can I think about today that might make a significant difference to conservation and the planet by default? More and more, we broaden our scope, but still a lot of it is focused on biodiversity. And how do we save individual species, not individual animals, but how do we save individual species? Because we can't afford to see one more go, because we're coming to understand that these are the drivers that keep the planet together. And you can save 30 by 30, you can save a third of the planet quite easily, but the wrong third of the planet. You need to save a third of the planet that's got biodiversity on it. Otherwise, it's kind of useless, So that's what drives me every day. And so once that goal is there, then I'll go to a level of, can we do a film? Can we do a book? Is there an exhibition? Do we have to do a news piece on this? And I have to say that not every day is easy. Every now and again, we bump heads with whole governments. And then they don't like us for a little while. But I think that we have to rise higher than that. And I think that there's a huge difference between doing something and doing nothing. Yeah. And I think it's doing something that drives me.
Yeah, and absolutely, we really are, aligned in every way. And I can just go back to our early days of starting. What drove us then was the adventure, the exploration, living in awe, discovery. And it truly was a time where we lived in a space that everything was the unknown, and we were piecing it all together. But once we were very fortunate, I have to say, and incredibly privileged, although we created that privilege because it wasn't easy. But once we had that as the knowledge, it's almost like a baseline study. Scientists will talk about a baseline study. Then as we start to witness what was happening around us and how everything was escalating and not escalating towards protecting the planet, I think Dereck and I had an earlier warning than most people, as you know, so many climatologists, scientists did, that we were pushing the planet beyond what was reasonable. That gave us insight and drive. And I often think now that it's no longer the beauty that is propelling us forward, but it is the atrocities, because we know we're running out of time. Our Buffalo accident was another time where we realized that time is short. It's not only our mortality, but the planet's mortality. We somehow could piece together using us as a symbol of what happened to us, to what is happening to the planet. We managed to come through it, but from taking the right actions, are we going to take the right actions to keep the planet whole? And so that's really what drives us forward, is each day, what can we do to make a difference? How can we create better awareness? How can we create change? That's, you know, one moment where everybody gets it and we're all on the same page. Hopefully the pandemic actually has been one of those moments that has been essential. But what I fear is the pandemic has kept too many people in silos. And there's been so much fake news and so much paranoia happening around that I hope mass hysteria is not going to keep us from moving towards the positive way.
Yeah, I really hope so. So when you get back in the field, and hopefully that's, you know, that day is sooner rather than later, is there a particular project that you're passionate to do, if you can talk about it? You know, what's next for you?
So we've got a project 80-90% finished, and it needs finishing, and we're calling it Blood Moon. It's a story about rhinos, rhino poaching, but much more about what we did about it.
Right.
And what we did was, a couple of years ago, had a look at all of this, the rhino story, and then, because we're very solutions driven, and I think that's what wakes us up in the morning. And it wasn't enough just to say, let's do a film about rhino poaching. So what we did was we said, all right, we'll deal with the film later, but how about we gather around and gather money for moving rhinos out of the poaching hotspots and moving them across into safety somewhere else, secret locations. And so when I was having a conversation with a couple of potential donors, a potential partner and government, I said to them, we're going to move 100 rhinos. And they went, 100 rhinos? Wow, why not 10? And I said, well, 10 is not that interesting. Let's move 100.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to the former president of Botswana, and he said 100. So I said, well, it just sounds better than 99. So yeah, let's go for 100. But and so we set about raising money for this and moving these rhinos and collecting them out of Botswana, out of South Africa. Many of them had bullet holes in them already. But it was a real solution, and we were slinging these rhinos under helicopters and stuffing them into, you know, Russian airplanes and all sorts of things. So it's a sort of big adventure film that we then filmed, and it's a story of hope as well. We've moved 87 so far, and from that there've been 62 babies, and so it's a massive story of success and hope, with a little bit of a barb in it, as we're not quite sure about the poaching going forward.
Yeah. And so in a way, what we did is we targeted what we saw as the necessity. And so many films today are impactful, but we targeted and we went into that impact drive first, and then are bringing the film out. But we have brought the book out already, and that's called Blood Moon.
And the reason it's called Blood Moon is because when Beverly and I were out doing Eternal Enemies and all these others, and our very first book, I think, was
called Hunting with
the Moon. And we had these magical, wonderful evenings, working at night, sleeping on the top of our vehicle. And we early on discovered then that lions in those big open areas don't hunt in the full moon because it's like daylight. And so but to make very, very sure that we weren't going to lose them, we would find a pride of lions and nose our vehicle in amongst them. Yeah. So they were sleeping all around us. And then we ourselves would go to sleep on top of the roof or in the open vehicle. And so if we heard them roll over and grunt and move on. So we had these great romantic notions of the full moon. And then later on, we started to discover that every full moon in Africa, animals die. And the poachers go out because they don't need flashlights. They go out and they are slaughtering rhinos in particular in the full moon. And so we called it the blood moon.
My goodness.
And so even now, like 3 days ago was a full moon, and I remember looking at it and with some sort of anxiety at this stage, going, shit, I wonder how many we lost this tonight. Yeah. So,
wow.
Anyway.
But I mean, I think the overall story of what you're telling there is just in terms of what you're trying to do in terms of successful conservation. I know it's but that's an incredible, hopefully, legacy that you'll get to that 100, but also the babies that will come out of that. That's
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing the film, and yes, I will check out the book. But I honestly can't thank you enough for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating, some amazing stories, but it's just been, I know, we've known each other, but again, just going into a little bit more depth in some of these areas, it's been wonderful. So thank you very, very much.
Juliet, it's absolute pleasure, Jules.
Yeah, thank you. It's great. Yeah.
And then if you do want anything more, just reach out to us. Yeah. But also, projectranger.org is there. You can get more information. Foundation. We spread out all the community projects. So you can see, there's women, there's solar mamas, whatever there is. And then it looks like National Geographic, even though for 2 years they went quiet on the Big Cat Initiative, but Dereck and I managed to do, how many did we do through? I think we did an article a day, every day, or 2 articles a day, every day, right through the pandemic. And of course, with Dereck and I being explorers at large, National Geographic is mentioned in pretty much all of them, and we would always bring in the Big Cat Initiative. And I think they're starting to see, that it's silly to just wait because there's a pandemic. We never stopped. So we're out there talking about it all the time.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. And I'll make sure that there's links on that to again,
thank you.
Further amplification. So absolutely. Yeah.
But good luck with your, creating this platform. Yeah. I think it's going to be wonderful.
I hope so. I had some great support, from other photographers, but also some other film, couple of other filmmakers in India as well, with Sandesh. Who's going to help as well. So it's really exciting, and I hope that we can build it up, but just give forum from everybody trying to sort of work and do what they can. So
well, if there's any other way we can help, please reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, take care. Look after yourselves. See you soon.
Thank you.
You too. All the best, Jill.
Bye. Bye.